Welcome to the AI and Faith podcast. We are a community of expert technologists, professionals, and faith leaders bringing the ancient wisdom of the world's major religions to the ethics of artificial intelligence. Join us on this new journey and welcome to the conversation.
So the tools are sort of bivalent that way. But the technologies, like I say, are these bigger relational systems. And that's where I think religious reflection on the technologies is just as important as reflecting on how the tools might affect us for good or ill. So yes, the tools can be used for great things, for supporting religious practice. They can be abused as well. But then technologically, let's look at the bigger systems and wonder what we might be giving away and what we might be at risk of if we take it a little too far.
My name is Alex Sarkissian, and I'm your host for today's episode, featuring a conversation I had with Buddhist scholar and author Peter Hershock. We discussed what led Peter to Buddhist practice and his interest in technology, the importance of allowing for moral friction within our technology environment, how Buddhist principles, including mindfulness, karma, and interdependence, can help us to better navigate the age of AI, the opportunities and risks of using AI to support spiritual practice, and other topics. I really enjoyed my conversation with Peter, and I came away feeling a bit more hopeful about the future, provided that we continuously ask ourselves the question, in Peter's view, which is, am I being present in a way that matters most? Peter is director of the Asian Studies Development Program at the East-West Center in Honolulu, Hawaii, where he helped launch the center's initiative on humane artificial intelligence, which focuses on the societal impacts and ethical issues raised by emerging technologies. He holds a PhD in Asian and comparative philosophy, and much of his research and writing focuses on drawing from Buddhist conceptual resources to reflect on contemporary issues of global concern. He's the author of several books. His latest, from 2021, titled Buddhism and Intelligent Technology, Toward a More Humane Future. Peter, thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Great to be here with you, Alex.
I'd love to start, if you don't mind, sharing a bit about your spiritual background and how you came to Buddhism.
I was a spiritually precocious kid. And by that I mean that I had what felt like at the time some sincere sort of spiritual experiences. One of which was when I was a whopping 7 years old. And a young girl from down the hill behind us asked me where God was. And I knew the standard answer. I was raised in a Roman Catholic family. I knew the standard answer, God's in heaven. But I knew that didn't make much sense because, heaven's up there, but God can't just be up there, right? And so I took a look, and it was just like, in one instant, it was like looking like the world's just exactly the same as it is always, but it was like it was projected on a shiplap fence. And I suddenly was able to go just at the angle that I could look between the slats, and then you're everywhere. And it was just this experience of being everywhere all at once and this brilliant sort of sense of presence. And I looked at her and I said, God is everywhere. And she looked at me and she says, oh yeah? Well then point to him. So it was my first koan, right? Because I realized if I point anywhere, I'm wrong. If I don't point anywhere, I'm wrong no matter what I do. And I was stunned into silence. I left the room, went out in the backyard, got on the swing set, and went back and forth on the swing set for 2 hours until the sun went down, trying to figure out how do you answer that question. I went through the altar boy training, that type of stuff. The experience left me with a disenchantment with organized religion, and I went off into the 1960s path. And so did the whole civil rights interest, counterculture interest. Came across Buddhism in high school because I was a janitor at my high school senior year, double session, and one of the rooms I had to teach was being used by the biology teacher to do a meditation class. And I said, I got to clean this room. And he says, we've got to meditate. So we made an agreement. I meditated with him and the other students, and then we cleaned the room together. So I actually started meditating in high schools, got interested, started reading about Buddhism, followed that through university, and then met a Korean Zen teacher in 1978, under whom I started practicing immediately. Did a 3-day retreat and said, that's it, this clicks.
Beautiful. And how did the technology question come into the mix along the way?
Well, I've always been kind of like a tech interest person. I mean, I started reading sci-fi early as a kid, and you grew up in the chemistry is the future era of the 1950s and 60s, got into audio stuff. So I always had a bit of a tech interest, but I really got interested in society and technology issues when I was traveling in Bali, mid 1980s, on the top of Mount Agung, 10,000-foot volcanic mountain in the middle of the Indonesian archipelago. And this little girl and her brother were selling water to tourists at the top, and they asked me whether I was MacGyver. And I thought, this is in the middle of nowhere in Indonesia, and this 7, 8-year-old girl who's got enough English to talk to tourists and sell bottled water knows about MacGyver. And I just started this conversation with them, and it's the only Hindu island in an otherwise Muslim majority nation. And I was asking them about stories from the Mahabharata, the classic Indian text. They didn't know the stories. I asked them from stuff like basic Bhagavad Gita, story of Krishna and Arjuna. Didn't know the stories, but they knew all about Dallas and MacGyver and all these American TV shows. And I just started thinking how mass media was really colonizing the planet. And so I did this book back in the late 90s called Reinventing the Wheel, a Buddhist response to the information age, in which I just started looking at what was happening then at the point when, the internet was just starting to crank up. Email was a relatively new thing still. But you could see these transformations taking place. And I became really interested in the idea of what it means when consciousness itself is getting colonized. There was colonization of lands, of labor, resources, but now it's like human consciousness is getting colonized, and the product, what's being drawn out of it, is our human attention energy. And I've just been tracking it since the late 90s. And a couple of years ago, I had the opportunity to do a Braconnot Institute fellowship in China, where I spent 6 months there and got to see what China was doing with the whole social media, internet, smartphone revolution. So much faster uptake than in the US. And it just started saying, okay, if this is where China's going, it's where the rest of the road's going to be going really fast. And where's that going to leave us in 3 or 4 or 5 years? And so I wrote the book you mentioned, Buddhism and Intelligent Technology, and said, we got to put the brakes on.
And yeah, putting a pin in the attentional piece and just turning to some of the other ethical risks that you raise in that book, specifically as they relate to AI. One of them being that, as we come to rely on these tools increasingly for everything that we do, we unknowingly over time are essentially like atrophying the moral and emotional and intellectual and even like physical skills that make us human. And, I can already see this, in my own life and in the way that people are using generative AI for tasks that most of us would probably agree that, we don't want to be outsourcing. But when it's just so easy and convenient, it's hard not to, thinking of like writing a thank you card, for instance. And the end game of all this, which you articulate so wonderfully in your book, is essentially AI situating each of us in custom-made, individualized experience bubbles where our every wish is granted. And before we even consciously know we want a thing, we get the thing. And you ask, I want to quote you, what will the moral result be if we are never in a position to discover deficiencies in our intentions and desires because we only experience their fruits fleetingly before being enticed into new experiences by tireless sirens that have been coached by seers privy to everything we have ever said, written, done, and felt significantly enough for it to leave an informational trace. And I really think that's so spot on. And, most spiritual traditions, Buddhism included, obviously emphasizes the importance of challenge and friction in order to develop spiritually. Thich Nhat Hanh said, no mud, no lotus, right? And as you point out, quoting again, the compassionate improvisational genius of the bodhisattva develops only in rational domains characterized by resistance and friction, in communities of practice in which there are standards of conduct and thus potential for virtuosity, end quote. And so my question, I guess, is, as we obviously leverage AI to materially improve the lives of human beings, as we should, wisely as we can, how do we also introduce that necessary moral friction into a technology culture that values efficiency and solutionism above all else?
Yeah, I think it's a complex question because nobody likes friction, moral friction or any other kind. I mean, we tend to want to avoid it at all costs. And yet we also know that if you don't have friction, it's like trying to get traction on an icy surface. You can't get anywhere without friction. So a frictionless world is one in which our intentions don't really have the kind of purchase in the world. to start to make the differences that would actually give us the resources of getting more liberating relational dynamics at play. So you're right that some kind of a friction is necessary, and it often will entail undertaking kind of a step back from our more normal desire to like have things as easy as they can possibly be, and realize, yeah, take it easy is great. You also need to take things vigorously. But one of the things I point out in the book is that we're at risk of really trading off some intelligent human practices for these smart services in things that are really basic. For example, memory. I use the example in the book, and I just think it says so much because, if we're talking about engaging moral friction in a way that allows us to grow from that, not just to resist and resent it, but to actually grow from it, then what we've got to be able to do is to engage our partners in that discussion or in that moment of friction in a way that allows us to track moment by moment what they're really valuing, what matters to them, how it's significant for them, maybe how it doesn't matter as much for us, but we've got to engage them and understand, yes, they're 100% right 20% of the time. And we're maybe 100% right. And we may believe we're right 30% of the time. We think we're right 100% of the time. But they're making us aware that we're not. But to follow that through, it's like playing music together. You've got to have your attention focused moment by moment by moment and not do what is so easy, and that's to spiral off in our little thought patterns where you go, they're wrong. I don't know why this person's saying that. I can't believe that she believes this, that kind of thinking, to just stay with it. And so basic meditation practice in Buddhism, as everybody's heard now, mindfulness practice. But the term sati really means remembrance. And so if we give up our capacity to remember, that is to be present, moment by moment by moment, sustaining our presence, remembering in that most basic fundamental sense, we can't hold a good conversation, we can't have a moral debate, we can't play music together, we're not capable of doing anything. Yet you ask young people today what their parents' phone numbers is, they'll pull out their phone and look. They have no idea what that phone number is. You ask somebody how to get around in the city, and for many, many young people today, it's automatic. They just put on the GPS. It tells them where to go. They follow instructions. And so I really worry that at the most basic level of engaging in the kind of public discourse that we need to do if we're going to resolve the kind of really difficult predicaments that we face today, whether it's tech related, it's political, it's cultural, it's climate change, or what have you. If we don't have such basic intelligent practices as memory, mindfully sustained presence over time, we're not going to get anywhere with it. So I think that some form of resistance to that is necessary. And I think something like meditative training is a prophylactic for being able to be in this world of media inundation without necessarily getting infected by the viral stuff that's going on in the mediascape.
Totally agreed. And yeah, it raises just why Buddhism in particular might be a helpful framework, a helpful tradition, a helpful spiritual tradition to look to in terms of what we can draw from its teachings around how to meet the challenges posed by AI. Obviously, there's a central focus on cultivating the mind, one aspect of which is mindfulness, another concentration, basically gathering our mind, our attentional capacities to be more present in an embodied way, fully, not just intellectually, but with our whole selves. What are some of the other aspects of Buddhism that you feel are particularly relevant to this moment and the particular challenges and questions raised by AI?
Yeah, I think it's the two basic insights that occurred legendarily on the night of the Buddha's enlightenment. And I'll do them in reverse order. The kind of key insight that gets all the play in the Western Buddhist press is the insight that everything arises interdependently. And if you factor that through a kind of a Mahayana Buddhist lens, then what that really means is that there's ontologically, in terms of what really exists, it's relationality all the way down. At that all independently existing things are abstractions from pre-existing relational dynamics. That teaching about interdependence is that everything arises in relation with other things and only exists and is what it is because of what it means for all other things. So we each are what we mean for one another. Basic insight. The second insight, which actually occurred first on that night of the Buddha's legendary enlightenment, and that is the insight that we live in a karmically structured cosmos. Now, what's interesting about that is the Buddhist understanding of karma, unlike the Hindu one that preceded it, where you have this sort of a moral law that's unshakable, immutable. It's there. You do a bad action, you're going to get a certain kind of bad consequence. The Buddhist model was that karma operates, but it's the cosmos that we exist in is a participatory cosmos, where the order of the cosmos, the order of experiences we have it, depends on how we're engaging it. So the patterns of our actions, intentions, and the values that inform them are what result in the kind of relational opportunities and outcomes that we get. That's the karmic insight. If you look at your own patterns of values, how you put those into intentions, how you enact them, you will know exactly what kind of things are in store for you. And you also get the opportunity to either repeat, start over again, intensify that dynamic, or to change it. So the beauty about that karmic cosmos, participatory one, is that Buddhism says if you pay really close attention to your experience, what are your values? What did you intend? And how well did you enact them? And look at the patterns of outcome and opportunity that are occurring, you are always in a position to change those dynamics. You can change the direction things are going. That means we're responsible for our position in the world. And I think it's a good lesson to keep in mind when you're engaging things like intelligent technology and realizing we can blame big tech. We can blame the corporations and the governments that have our data and using it, whether it's for building military AI or it's capitalist AI. We can blame them, and they are responsible for what they're doing, but we're also responsible because nothing can happen to us unless we willingly enter into it. We're engaging this situation. So I think part of what Buddhism offers us is a set of conceptual resources for looking at how technology is not just reducible to the individual tools like the smartphone or the computer that we're using, this interface, the Zoom interface, all that. It's a set of social relations that's bigger than just those tools, and that we are responsible for being embedded within them and shaping them as we go. That our technologies emerge out of our engagements with one another in the world the way ecosystems emerge out of species relations. After they've emerged, they start to constrain those relations as well. Our technology open up massive opportunities for us to engage the world differently, but also constrain our possibilities. And we need to be aware of that. And at the core of it, what are the values and intentions that we're embodying within these technologies?
And it's easy to think about these things in the abstract, right? And these principles and these teachings and sort of understand how they apply to AI writ large. And then it's another to think more concretely about how to actually operationalize these principles and these teachings in terms of how we approach research and development and regulation, and certainly how we as users engage with these tools as well. I wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be able to do the work that I do, writing, thinking, going traveling, without the technology that we've got. We're embedded in that world. There's no way out of it at this point. You leave this world of digital connectivity and you've made yourself irrelevant. So we're embedded in it. And the question is really how well can we use it? And can we do the kind of things within it that will start to shift the dynamic? So for example, if you take the kind of Buddhist approach and you say that we should orient ourselves toward the world in a way that's compassionate and wise. Wise means insight into interdependence, how it all connects together, seeing how karma operates, and then acting in accord with our best understanding of how to be compassionate in our situation. And then you look at the way the world's being structured, say by the digital platform capitalism that's been emerging over the last 15, 20 years, where the basic values that are embedded in that are not compassion, it's competition. Individual choice, individual control. And we could look to neuroscience and say, we've now got really good documentation that says your brain and my brain will resonate if we're engaged in collaborative activity, compassionate collaborative activity. But if we're competing, our brains will not collaborate. They won't resonate with one another. It also matters what we believe. So if we believe that we're collaborating with, say, another human being versus an AI, our brains will resonate. That means we have shared consciousness in a very real, fundamental way. Our neural infrastructures are resonating together. It's like two musical instruments with their strings resonating with one another. It just sets you up for acting in harmony. But if we've got digital platforms that are based on the value of competition, whether it's competing for likes on social media, just at that most basic level, we're reducing the conditions that are required for us to engage one another in the kind of compassionate ways we do to deal with the moral frictions that you were talking about earlier. Because we can only do that if we find some shared ground to work from. And if the digital media are keeping us from doing that, we need to transform those digital media.
And it just speaks to how all these different systems are interacting, right? And like, yeah, our technology culture doesn't exist on its own. And there's so many other things that need to change alongside our approach to technology in order to create a broader culture that supports liberating technology, our economic system being one of them, obviously, and the way we engage one another in community and in relationship. And it raises this question for me around, it's kind of a chicken or the egg question, you know? And I want to quote you again. In your book, you say, quote, realizing the liberating potentials of intelligent technology will depend on whether we succeed in liberating ourselves from our tendencies to embody conflicting values, intentions, and actions. And to me, it sounds like you could be referring to the fact that certain unskillful tendencies, which in the Buddhist tradition typically refer to patterns of greed and hatred and confusion about what's actually happening in the human experience, that these tendencies will always be operating on some level, short of being fully awakened beings, and will inherently complicate our capacity to achieve true flourishing individually and collectively. And I don't think you're suggesting that we all need to be Buddhas before we can realize the liberating potential of AI. But I am curious what it would look like to be liberated from our tendencies to embody conflicting values, intentions, and actions, as you say. And is that not fundamentally human and very Buddhist to exist in and express paradox?
Yeah, I mean, the teacher, Indian philosopher teacher Nagarjuna, once said that the distance between samsara, the world of conflict, trouble, and suffering cyclically playing out, and nirvana, the release from all the conditions that lead to samsara, is just a hair's breadth difference between them. And so you're right. I don't think that it's not about, I don't see Buddhist enlightenment or awakening as being escaping from the world. It's being in the world in such a way, if you take the bodhisattva ideal, in such a way that you can discern what the patterns of meaning are flowing through that situation and to intervene in those patterns in ways that will orient them in a more liberating fashion for everybody that's involved. So that's what we're trying to do. And we stumble our way through. But when it comes with high tech and with using things from smartphones to the tablet things to play video games to getting your news feeds and all the rest of it, we're talking about a human experience that now is ranging from kids that are toddlers who are being given, iPads to play with when they're a year and a half, 2 years old. So just as they're learning language, everything that they're doing is being shaped by these digital media. And then it's a teenager who's got a whole different set of desires with transformation that's going on hormonally and bodily with that. All kinds of things going on, all of it being tracked, reinforced, fed. And then you get people who are your age, my age, close to 70 now. And it's just at every step, there's something different going on. So I don't think that there's one solution for everybody. I think that's something that you could say to someone who's in the full-on professional life is quite different from what you're going to say to a 5-year-old. So I don't think there's one policy that's going to factor across those. But I think basic to it is just realizing we don't want to live in a world in which other people get to decide for us, to curate for us in the entirety our experience. That's the danger of the digital world, is it's curated. There is nothing that happens accidentally in that world. But it's the things, there's, like you were saying, the resistance that you get. The resistance that you get from people around you that you don't agree with that helps us to grow. As long as we've got that commitment, okay, I'm going to use my capacity for mindfulness and concentrated attention and insight into the causes of this conflict to deal with the situation and improve it. And that means being vulnerable and open to change. So I think that one of the things we want to do within all spiritual traditions is to be raising our children from the get-go to be responsible for their experience. And that means giving them the tools, the resources, whether it's prayer, whether it's meditation, giving them the resources for drawing themselves back to a present from which they can connect everything, unmediated connection with the things around them. Because it's that lack of mediation that I think is really crucial, to have time for that. Now that's one dimension on the personal side. And so I think you could say good for everybody to engage in digital fasting. Just like physical fasting, it's good for the system to do that. But that's not going to be enough to deal with digital platform capitalism or what's going on with the attention economy. For that, we need different strategies. And so in the book, I recommend data strikes, not data fast, data strikes, collective action. And there, I think it's a political issue, it's a social issue, it's a cultural issue. We've got to resolve these predicaments, these conflicts of values. And one way in which we do that is to say to the media that we do want honest reporting. We want fact checkers everywhere, maybe, at least before elections. We need fact checkers.
Absolutely.
And we can demand that collectively because these systems can't function without our data. The algorithmic systems cannot improve their behavior, can't improve what they're designed to do without our data and a continuing stream of the data. To the point that now in the tech world, they're talking about the possibility of needing to develop synthetic data to be able to keep the algorithms on learning curves. Our data is important, so we have some leverage collectively.
Yeah, it's fascinating. We're still early days, obviously, and we don't know how this is all going to unfold, but it's easy, I think, at this moment to focus in on the ways in which this could all go wrong, for the obvious reasons that some of which you've just touched on. And you've made the argument in your book so well, just the ways in which information technology together with the attention economy can be seen ultimately as a hindrance to progress on the spiritual path. And I also wonder whether there is a way in which AI and digital culture more broadly can be seen as pointing to certain liberating spiritual truths in a way that are always there, of course, to be realized in every moment, but that perhaps would be less apparent without these technologies. And you say in your book that, quote, everyday metaphysics of the intelligence revolution are affecting an erasure of clear boundaries between the global and the personal, between the public and the private, and between control and choice. And obviously, from a Buddhist perspective, those boundaries aren't ultimately substantial. So, while they're true and important on a more relative level, taking them to be fixed and solid is seen as a cause for suffering and furthering our own confusion. And so I wonder if, AI is helping us to see this truth and perhaps other spiritual truths, whether highlighted by Buddhism or other traditions. And how might we understand the age of AI as being conducive to awakening? Or how can we think about AI being used to help us develop morally and spiritually? Can we think of it as skillful means on some level?
Yeah, I'm going to a conference in Nepal next week on the Buddhist scholar practitioner in the age of AI. And of the people who are coming there, from what I know, at least half of them are going to be endorsing the use of AI, embracing large language models, transformer systems as an adjunct to Buddhist scholarship and potentially as an adjunct to Buddhist practice. And I think that that's entirely legitimate. It's a little bit like using search engines for doing research. If you're a writer, if you're putting a story together as a journalist, it's hard to beat what you can get through the internet. As long as you've got some sense of how to vet that information, a sense of what's good sources and what's not. My gosh, what's opened up is incredible. So if you're just taking a religious tradition and saying, whether it's a Christian tradition, a Buddhist tradition, you've got thousands of years worth of text, many of them written in languages that none of us read. And large language models can translate those things pretty decently now, and they'll get better and better at it. Will they need to be corrected with some understanding humans in the loop? Yeah, of course. But to do that translation work, to take and do a first initial translation of 100-page text in 10 seconds rather than 5 years, it's just an incredible adjunct to what we could be doing. And across the board, if you're looking at being hooked up to a MRI system and you can determine what kind of meditation practice for you is realizing the kind of disruptions of the default mode network that's associated with reducing those habit formations conceptually, perceptually, in terms of self-identity, that's part of opening up in a spiritual practice, then you can actually see, does this mantra work better for you? Is it better for you to do a silent, counting breath meditation? What's actually working for you? So I think that high tech can become part of religious and spiritual traditions. All good. But I worry because that's just focusing on the tool. Large language model is a tool we can use for good or ill. We can use it to run scams on people, as is being done across the world now, where you fake somebody, it looks just like Alex does, gets online, calls Alex's mom and says, "Mom, forgot my credit card. I really need to buy this airplane ticket. Can you give me your number now? Mom gives the number because the voice is exactly you only need 3 seconds of audio nowadays to generate an absolutely flawless fake of somebody's voice. You could do the same thing video now. I mean, it could be used for really bad purposes. So the tools are sort of bivalent that way. But the technologies, like I say, are these bigger relational systems. And that's where I think religious reflection on the technologies is just as important as reflecting on how the tools might affect us for good or ill. So yes, the tools can be used for great things, for supporting religious practice. They can be abused as well. But then technologically, let's look at the bigger systems and wonder what we might be giving away and what we might be at risk of if we take it a little too far. So one of the things I'll say in this meeting next week is you could use these same systems to try to develop an idea of how you can engineer the religious experience. And if you're engineering the religious experience and taking effort out of the equation, to take that effort, whether it's the effort to get down on your knees and pray, or the effort to sit on a cushion day after day, there's effort that's involved in the spiritual rewards that we get. So that's why effort's one of the 6 paramitas in Buddhism, these for possibilities of relational perfection. If we factor that out, are we going to run the risk of engaging in what amounts to digital eugenics, where we could just program people to be the way we think they are? And the danger is, I'm a 21st century Buddhist. I think women should have equal authority within Buddhist institutions. That's not historically the case in Buddhism. Historically, women have had subordinate roles to men throughout the tradition. So if we took 100 years ago's morality and hardwired that in digitally to the way everybody lives, I don't think that serves humanity well. So I think we want to be asking those bigger questions about where we're heading with this, rather than just, can I use it for good? Because of course we can. The tools we can use for good. Otherwise we abandon them and don't bother.
And it comes back to who do we want to be present as? The question that you raise in your book. In every moment, right? There's an opportunity to clarify our intentions, our values that are informing how we move through the world.
Every spiritual tradition that I know of has at its basis grappling with the question, what matters most in my being present? Ultimately, that's what we're really worried about. And you can go through the motions of the life that's prescribed by you from the time and place you were born in, the family you were born in, the opportunities that you had and that you missed, and all that can play out. And that's a good life, potentially. But a spiritual life includes asking repeatedly along the way, moment by moment, am I being present in a way that matters most? And if we can be in the world with intelligent technology and keep asking that question, then I think we're okay. I think humanity will do okay. But if we don't, and we're lulled into this wonderful dream in which all of our wishes are anticipated by algorithmic systems that know us better than we know ourselves, then I don't know that there's a way out of that cul-de-sac, as I describe it, once we've taken up full residence in it. I don't know that that's possible. I hope it is. I hope that there's no place that we can end up. In Buddhism, there's this idea of you've got these different hell realms. And one of them was the one reserved for people who, for example, tried to kill the Buddha. Yeah. And some people said it's such a bad hell realm you can never get out. But no enlightenment possible. But then you also couldn't get enlightened in the God realms. And so it's only in this human realm where you got to deal with the complexities and the conflicts and all the rest of it that we've got that possibility for realizing liberating relationships. It's why I just say personally and societally, let's put on the brakes a bit, slow it down, and really start to ask that deep question. Is this helping me be present in the ways that matter most for us, for me and for us? Is it helping me to mean something increasingly better, more valuable to others, or not? Because if it's just this competitive dynamic, that isn't going to get us there. The question we ask is, if I am only what I mean for others, in order for me to improve my position, my value, my place in the world, I've got to figure out what I can do for others, how I can benefit them. That's the bodhisattva energy, right? If we're not doing that all the time, figuring out what matters most and carrying out that process, then we're going to be led astray.
Peter, before we close, I asked Gen AI, obviously, to come up with a few koans for the age of AI. And honestly, not so bad. Wanted to share a few of my favorites. First one, when all experiences can be simulated, what cannot be copied? Between 0 and 1, where does awareness arise? And I think this might be my favorite. What is your original face before facial recognition?
That's a good one.
It's pretty good. Putting you on the spot, do you have one to add to the mix?
No, I think what I'll do is rest with that one, with the original face before facial recognition, but throw into the mix just the possibility that recognizing yourself in the mirror of this world around us is a task that I don't think the AI is quite up for yet. I don't think it's able to recognize itself. And the question is, can we recognize ourselves in the dynamics of the world around us? Because if we're able to do that, we're in a position to start changing it. We can crack that koan. But if we're looking at the world and thinking it's all out there, it's not me, I'm not responsible for it, then I think we've got a very, very long way to go. So it's, can you see your original face in the world in front of you now and what's in front of your face? Can you see your original face in what's in front of you now?
May it be so. Thanks so much, Peter.
Hey, it was great having a conversation. Hopefully I didn't talk too much.
Not at all. It was lovely to be with you. Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. Stay tuned to listen to more recordings and interviews with experts from around the world. In the meantime, follow and rate our podcast on your favorite podcast platform and share with your friends. Don't forget to follow us on our social media as well. We're on LinkedIn and X. Thank you for joining us today.